Perfect. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Center for Student Involvement and Careers and UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Today, you may be joining us from many places with many different histories. And you can learn more about the traditional owners of those lands at native-land.ca. And you can find that link in the chat as well. You should be able to see a QR code and a link on your screen and in the chat. Please take a moment to either follow the link or scan the code and let us know that you're here. This is just your way to check into the event. We really appreciate it. Whilst in our event space, I would also like to remind everyone that all members of the UBC community are expected to uphold a respectful environment in which civility, diversity, opportunity, and inclusion are valued. For those of you who may not know, the CSINC is home to UBC's Central Career Office and a resource for all UBC students. At the CSINC, you will find our Work Learn program, our career development coaches, virtual workshops, and online resources, as well as the employer and alumni team who create opportunities to engage with employers and professionals through career fairs, employer information sessions, and Careers Online job board. My name is Amir, and I do work with the employer and alumni engagement team, and I'll be your moderator today. You can visit us at Brock Hall or through your account on Careers Online to learn more about our services. All participants are muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to turn on your cameras as it'll be nice to see some of your faces as we go through our presentations and this conversation. You will have an opportunity for a Q&A in the second half of today's office hour. Some of you have already sent us your questions, and we'll make sure to get to those questions once we get to the Q&A. You're also welcome to either send them in the chat once we do get to Q&A, or turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask your question. We first ask you to raise your hand and give us an opportunity to speak with Patricia and ask a question from there. Okay, I'm now happy to introduce today's speaker, Patricia Poon. Patricia is a 2017 BCom graduate majoring in Finance and Business Technology Management based in Los Angeles, California. Prior to her current role as a customer engineer at Google, she was a technical program manager at Airbnb and a digital consulting team lead in Accenture's Toronto office. Since graduating, she has 6 years experience designing, building, and launching software products for banks, retailers, and governments. Patricia is passionate about trust, safety, accessibility, and sustainability in software and technology platforms. Today, Patricia is eager to answer your questions about financial aid while studying, extracurriculars in university, setting and achieving career goals, job searching, salary negotiation, being an Asian woman in tech, working in the US as a Canadian, and continued education. I'll now give the floor to Patricia. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Amir, for that very, very warm introduction. And hey, everyone, it's really great to meet you all. I hope that I can just spend a little bit of time with you today and at least give you some tips, share my story about how I got here. I am very, very fortunate, very, very lucky. So just wanted to pass on some of those tips to you and share, what I did. Hopefully it's helpful. So if it's okay, Amir, I think I'll go ahead and share my screen then. I've got some slides here. And Amir, as you mentioned, did send me some of your questions. I did take a look, and I'll try to address them as I go through the prepared slides, but I'm very, very excited to also talk with you all during Q&A. And as Amir mentioned, feel free to drop it in the chat. I will try to keep that window open, but I think if Zoom will cooperate with me.
I can help on this side too, no problem.
Yeah, thanks. Feel free to just shout them out. It's no problem. Interruptions are no problem at all. So I just wanted to share with everyone a little bit about myself. So you kind of get an idea, and Amir did a fantastic job at my bio, but just so you kind of get an idea, what my background is. And then I want to share, the steps that I took in terms of career planning, my resume, cover letter, networking, and then a little bit of salary negotiation tips, and then answer any questions you have. So I think Amir did cover most of this already. I did graduate from UBC in 2017. The pictures here, here's Hong Kong, where I was born. I spent most of my childhood in Vancouver, where I grew up. I worked in Toronto a little bit, as Amir mentioned, and now I am in LA and loving it, where I work for Google in the Google Cloud division. So just a little bit of my position. What I do is a little bit interesting. So I'm called a customer engineer. It's kind of a mismatch of, a customer facing person and a software engineer. So if you guys don't know what Google Cloud does, is that we provide a platform where companies can also run their infrastructure and databases on Google, and Google will take care of that. So for example, all the infrastructure that YouTube or Google Maps runs on, that can be available for other companies to use if you don't want to build it yourself. So as a customer facing engineer, I basically help if someone wants to use pieces of our infrastructure and has questions or doesn't know where to start, I basically help them with that. So that's the long and the short of it. In terms of experience outside of my day-to-day job, I'm very, very involved in recruitment. Whenever I worked at either Accenture or here at Google, at Accenture, I was one of the recruiting leads for Canada. In sort of my extracurricular involvement, I screened hundreds of resumes for both management consulting and technology. I conducted many, many interviews, and I even wrote the questions and the grading criteria as well. Here at Google, I've only been here about 6 months, but I've started doing interviews too. So just wanted to share that. So this is where I'm coming from. Hopefully my words have a little bit of weight to them. There were a number of questions I think we got from Amir about background and experience. One of the ones that really stood out to me was, what advice did you get early on in your career that kind of made the most impact for you? And of course, there's lots of advice when you're starting and as a new graduate and going into the workforce. But for me, one of my senior managers early on at Accenture, when I was working in consulting, kind of told me this, and this really stuck with me. He said to me, Patricia, you really care, right? And I can hire super smart people. I can hire people with lots of experience, decades of experience, but you cannot teach someone to care. Right. So I would share that with you. I know you all have a passion. I know you all care about not only doing good work, but doing right by your customers and your clients, by your projects and your company. So don't lose that pride, take it with you, because it is something that I hear time and time again. It really shows. Some people show up to work, try to make it through the day or the week and collect a paycheck. But if you kind of go a little bit above and beyond that, I think that really takes you far. And genuinely, that's one attitude that I'd have taken with me for the last 6 years. I really think it's very important. So let me keep going here. Come on. Okay. I talked about this, so we'll skip it. So I'll jump right into the content. What were some of the things that I did? So when we look at the title of this office hours, 10 years ago today, I just started as a first-year student at UBC. I was working as a server at Earl's Restaurant, just trying to pay the bills. And it's a little bit crazy if you think about now that I have a very good job. I'm very fortunate, work with a great team. So what were the steps that I took myself to kind of get here, right? And the first step that, if I look back, this is where I would start every time I'm looking for a career transition or looking for, if I want to switch to a new job, I would set a very clear goal in my mind. And this is something that I also talk about with my mentees is once you have set that goal, then you can understand, the job requirements, you can understand what the gap is, and take very logical planned steps to help you get there. So the goal that I would always recommend when we're charting our career path is, I want to work for a specific group of companies in a location as a role. Now, it doesn't have to be just one. You can say, I want to work for these several companies or companies in this sector or companies like blank in certain locations in the US and North America and Asia and Europe as a certain role. So I'll break it down and I'll give you an example. But my next step here, what's going on with my mouse? I'm sorry, guys. My next step here is that once we've clearly identified, this is the direction I want to go, then we break it down to understand the job requirements, right? And we'll talk about these as well. We can look at the LinkedIn job posting in terms of the requirements. We can talk to someone who works at that company. And you might ask me, hey, Pat, I don't know anyone who works at a dream company. And we can talk about that too. I have some tips and tricks. And then also this helped me a lot is if you have heard of workplace apps like Blind or Fishbowl. It's a more casual, like social media place for working professionals to get together and talk about, the interviewing process, the preparation process, and salary negotiation. So these apps actually very much helped me out. And I'll show you a couple tools that I use as well when I was looking at, hey, what are the company cultures that I'm looking for? What is a salary range that I desire, and what companies are offering that? Very, very helpful. So the very last portion of this is, of course, bridging the gap, right? And these are the things that I personally came up with. I don't have enough experience, right? I don't know anyone at the companies I want to work for. I'm just graduated and I don't have any money to move, I have student loans. And particularly for me, if I was looking to work outside of Canada, I need visa sponsorship, right? So that's not one I'm going to spend a lot of time on today. It's very personal. But at a very basic level, these were the ideas that I came up with in terms of how I can overcome these for myself. And on the next slide, I'll actually walk through in detail what my experience was here. So some of the ideas, I'm like, okay, what can I do? If I was a new graduate or at this time when I was looking to make a transition from, my new grad job at Accenture into tech specifically, could I look at pivoting my role in my current company? So maybe I can go to my manager and ask to take on a specific project where I can gain the skills and then put that on my resume and try to be hired externally for that position. I found Coursera, many free courses on Coursera offered by Harvard, Stanford, MIT, very impressive names. You can get certificates for free. And very technical roles as well in terms of analytics, in terms of software engineering. Or potentially I might have to go back to school and take my MBA or potentially take a master's of science. So those were all ideas that I came up with, and they might work for you as well. In terms of, I don't know anyone at the company, so I have a number of slides later on about how we can connect and find the right people on LinkedIn. The hurdle of not having any money to move. So maybe it means I have to work at my current job for another year. Maybe it means that I will go through the interview process and then understand what is possible for me to negotiate from a relocation or signing bonus perspective, right? And there are some websites that I'll show you where you can people have actually published during the negotiation process how much relocation bonus is typically given. So you can kind of have an idea before you even start interviewing for those companies. And then just to share my personal experience in terms of visa sponsorship, I was aware that UBC had a free legal aid program, offered by the Allard Law students. Sometimes the companies that you're interviewing for will also offer you some legal aid, throughout the interview process at a certain point, or potentially a not-for-profit community organization in your area, right? Do we have any questions coming through yet, Amir?
No questions yet.
All right,
I think.
perfect. Feel free to drop them in, folks. Now I'll just walk you through and try to make it real what my journey was here. So here's my example. I wanted, this was something that I definitely did not set this up 10 years ago. This was a newer thought that I had maybe a year or 2 years ago, was that I'm currently working in Toronto as a consultant. I want to work in LA at Google as, potentially 3 different roles. So I'm okay with any of these. Now, I have experience at a company, but it's only in Canada, and I don't really know how to code. I've been working peripherally with tech, but my skills aren't too strong here, right? And what I did was I had checked the US government website, and I understand that I do have some limitations, right? If I want to get sponsored, I will need to prove some deep technical abilities. And although I do have, maybe marketing experience and a marketing background, or potentially a consulting generalist background where it would be feasible for me to get that sort of job in Canada, that might not be a viable path for me in the US, right? So I'm going to need to go deeply technical here. What I did was I brushed up on basic coding and architectural concepts on, again, free online courses. I'm going to update my cover letter and resume and just ask someone to refer me to Google. And then here are some other thoughts that, I was thinking about as well. I know that, and then just to make sure that my resume was competitive, I know that Google Cloud is one of the company's top growth priorities. So I'm going to try to apply there. I assume that, there will be more jobs there. However, the other thing is that, I was interested in potentially a different role, a product management role. But I know it's really competitive and I don't think I can compete right now. So potentially, if I'm still interested in that sort of role, I might try to apply to, another role and transfer over later. The spoiler alert is that I really like my role now, so I probably won't be transferring, but that was kind of these are all the thoughts that I had in my head of like, how can I, what path can I take to get to sort of a dream role that I wanted. And then of course I had some plan Bs. So I didn't assume that this was going to work. And this is actually what ended up happening. I had to go with my plan B because I applied and didn't get an interview. So what ended up happening was that, I do want to get some US work experience. And I felt that with US tech companies only having Canadian experience, frankly, was a little bit of a setback for me personally. So I asked my current company if I could actually transfer to the US. And I'm very fortunate that they were able to do that for me. I spent some time working on US clients, and then I reapplied to Google. So the US clients, for example, you had heard that I was able to become a technical program manager for Airbnb on a bit of a secondment. So that was one of the core experiences that I think probably helped boost my resume. Now, if that didn't work, my plan C, and this is for me, right? This might be your actual first choice. We might have different priorities. And a lot of my friends did this, went back to school, took their MBA or took their Master's of Science, and then there was a school recruiting program directly into the companies they wanted to work for. So I'm just sharing that. It's just my example. I'm not saying this is going to be the right way. It's going to be your way, but hopefully that kind of brings it to life a little bit. Now I want to get a little bit more tactical and actually show you and share with you my thoughts of how I kind of use LinkedIn and use other tools to understand, what kind of role is right for me, to meet people, to understand salary ranges and expectations. So I had no idea where I wanted to start, right? So I'm actually just showing you a screenshot. I took this yesterday, so it's pretty recent, right? You can see all I've done here is just search, hey, what are jobs in LA in US? And this is a great way to do it if you have no idea like what you want to do, what company, what area. Just take a look at what companies are hiring, right? So if I were to have done this right now, I might take a look and see, okay, like I can see that the types of companies that are hiring in LA, obviously they're very media focused. You can expect that in LA. But some of these roles just aren't right for me. I'm not very interested in potentially commercial portfolio management, something like a head of partner advisory. That's way too senior for me. Maybe a product strategy planning and analysis. That's really not my skill set. So you can definitely narrow it down from there. So here's how I did it, right? These are the filters that I used. If I were graduating from school, I'd check entry level. I think mid-senior level or associate in my experience has been good for like career transitions. You can just choose all the companies that you want to work for, full-time or internship. And then for me personally, like I don't want to be on site all the time. So it was important for me to have a hybrid scenario. And then you narrow it down from there, right? So for me, I'm like, okay, I'm not too interested in potentially a pure finance job, not too interested in potentially, working for a healthcare provider. So you can, check the job functions and then the titles as well. And so all of these if you've looked at LinkedIn, you can actually just free type. You're not beholden to the pre-populated checkboxes. And this really helped me, narrow it down more and more until, this view kind of just looked like when I looked at it, it's like, these are all positions I would love to do, right? So that's a way to kind of narrow down the funnel and help you brainstorm. So once we've selected a number of roles, right? What are my tips to create a resume and a cover letter, right? So this is what I did. I wanted to understand my competition because I had no idea whether my resume, my cover letter was competitive at all. I didn't know who I was competing against. So what I did was I actually searched for people who are already working for those positions, like software engineer at Google, product manager at Amazon. And a lot of people, right, have this day and age filled out their LinkedIn, and they'll even have the bullet points, right? And they'll say like, improve the user retention rate by X% here on this product. And so I can kind of go one-to-one and say, wow, this person's experience is actually quite impressive. Either one, I don't have anything like that, or two, I think there's a way that I can sort of craft my experience, at least in the same format, even if it's, at a little bit of a lower level. So even if it's not a whole product where I improve the metric for, maybe it's a little feature, maybe it's a project, maybe it's something else, right? Or if I don't have direct experience working for, like improving a software product, maybe I can talk about a business project, or an optimization case, like supply chain optimization. So I was basically reading the bullet points on folks' LinkedIn and kind of trying to tailor my work experience, education history. It also helped me as well understand the gaps in my own work experience and my own education history. I mean, I looked at a lot of these profiles and I saw, folks typically, frankly, went to big name schools. They had a lot of technical education. A lot of them even had volunteer involvement that they would share. So it kind of got me to understand, okay, that maybe this is what would help me create a more well-rounded application. So then, and this was not an immediate process, right? This took me I would say from the time I decided to apply to these companies to the actually getting an interview was probably 2 years. Like that was a whole process. And then I'll leave you with just one tip for both the cover letter and resume that I've personally seen that works really well. So for the cover letter, I always try to tailor my cover letter for every single role that I'm applying, not only the company, but every single role. So as an example, right, when I applied to Amazon, they had leadership principles. That was very, very important. It was the core of their culture is what I found out. So in my cover letter, I specifically called out those principles by name. And I talked about how I, matched them. And then I also talked about, for example, when I was applying to certain business units, I would tailor my actual experiences to those business units. So for example, if I was applying for like a software engineer for a finance product, my cover letter and resume would have mainly experiences that I've worked on around banks, right? However, when I was looking for a engineering position for perhaps a mobile application team, I would be then talking about all the mobile applications that I've designed, not necessarily, the finance side. And then in terms of the resume, I think you're all quite familiar with the CAR format. So the context, the action that you did, and the result. I try to pack my resume with keywords, and the way that I have found to do that, to ensure that it's actually readable by those digital applicant tracking systems, is to just list them out at the bottom or the top of your resume. So for example, for me, it would look like skills, or computer languages that I know. I just list them out. I have personally found that, if you guys have seen, sometimes folks do a column on the side and they do those bubbles. So it'll be like empty bubbles, and then some will be filled in, and it'll be like, hey, like Microsoft Word, I have like 3 bubbles, and then Microsoft Excel, I have like 2 bubbles. Yeah, like you guys know what I'm talking about. Those are really bad for applicant tracking systems. So like when the recruiters feed your resume into the digital system, it doesn't pick it up, and it's a huge waste of space. So if anyone on the call today has that format in your resume, I would highly, highly recommend just taking it out, save some space, and just literally list it out in a line, right? And then one thing to note is that in North America, it's not required anymore to include a picture of yourself or an address, right? So that will give you a little bit more space, just squeeze those 2 more lines out of your resume. And I personally found, especially for me, that including an address, it does lead folks to, I wouldn't say like discriminate, but it's another point of questioning. If you're sending your application to an office where it's in LA, for example, and your address is in Vancouver, that might just raise questions at this point where you only just want to let your own experience shine. Get into that process and then potentially have that conversation after, right? Like you just don't want that to be a showstopper for you at this point. So that would be my recommendation, at least. Okay. And then I'm going to talk about LinkedIn because it helped me so much. I would say, for LinkedIn, make your title and your position very clear. So I have seen on LinkedIn where people write those long sentences in their headline, and by no means please don't be offended if you have that on your LinkedIn right now. I just found that this kind of helped me turn up in more searches on LinkedIn when recruiters are looking for you on LinkedIn. So one example is like, I have seen people on LinkedIn that says like, I am a stellar, blank, I am a stellar coder who helps blah, 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 or who is interested in blah, blah. I found that is you just really want to pack the keywords in there, right? So I have put position, company, and then here are the topics really that I feel like I can talk about. So this was something that I think really helped me when recruiters were reaching out. I proactively updated my location. So before I even moved, I switched my location to LA, and like the second I did, really, I was getting, I wasn't getting too many recruiters in my inbox. I think I got like 10 a week when I flipped it over for LA. So it really helps. And then of course you can turn on open to work. Right, I almost forgot, I put this here. The about section is a really, really great section where you can, again, put in a lot of those keywords. So just anything you can think of in terms of your experience, projects that you've worked on. If you've worked in certain teams, feel free to include that in there. Again, I think it really, really helps folks reach out to you and make sure you get found on LinkedIn. So now we're kind of moving along the process and talking about getting a referral. So really important here, and I've seen many of my friends and mentees make this mistake. It's very important, at least what I've seen the last couple of years and how companies have been working here in the US, to ask for the referral before you apply, right? Typically what happens is that when you ask for a referral, the person who refers you gives you a custom link and you apply using that link, and then you're put in a different queue, right? If you've gone ahead and applied in the general job site, there's nothing they can do for you once your application is already in the system. So really important there. And here we get to the question, right? Like, what if I don't know anyone at the company? Like, how do I find these people? So again, I turn to LinkedIn, and I've done this so many times. Like every time I apply to a company, I do this, and I search for people, right? So let's take the example, like my personal example of Google, but I've also done this when I was trying to apply to other tech companies. I'm looking for people. I'm looking for people who work at Google, who also worked at Accenture. So it's not clear from the drop down, but if you're able to say, I want to see who's currently at Google, who worked for my company, and then if that doesn't turn out much, you can also do this. I want to see who's working for Google, who went to my school, right? So you already have a little bit of connection there. And this has been quite successful. I would say that I have sent out many, many connection requests to the tune of like, hey, I see that you're working here, and that you also previously worked at Accenture, or that, we both graduated from UBC. I'm actually looking to apply to these positions. And sometimes I might even throw the link in there. I'm specifically looking to apply as a software engineer at Google. Just wondering if you knew anything about, this team, this position, wondering if we could have like a 15-minute chat about it. And I would say like most people responded. Like I think maybe out of all those connections that I sent, maybe like 2 or 3 didn't respond. And everyone was super nice about it. So I would highly recommend that. That's a great place to start. One more tip is that, don't just send out a random connect. Make it very clear, what you're looking for. Show that you've done your research. Not like, don't just say, hey, like, how's it working at Google? There's not much that people can help you with if you leave it open-ended. So that's what worked for me. Alrighty, so everyone's favorite topic, how do I know how much I should get paid, right? And how do I make sure that, especially me, not only as an Asian woman, as someone who's a little bit younger, working in the software space, but also as an immigrant who's kind of coming to the US on a visa, how do I make sure that I'm actually getting paid what I deserve? This is a site that has helped me so much. It's completely free. I don't work with them at all. Some of you might have heard of this site, but it's so helpful. It's called levels.fyi. That's the URL. And I'll just show you, how it helped me, right? So there's a couple of screenshots here that were so helpful. What you can do on this site is that you can compare not only levels between the companies, but also different roles, right? So you can sort by here, hey, if I'm applying as a software engineer or a management consultant at management consulting firms, or as a product manager, what levels do I come in? And by levels, I mean, is it more of a new graduate, junior level? Is it more of a senior associate level? Is it more of a manager level? And then what does that map to, across all the other companies? So there were some questions about, what's the salary range for this type of position? How did you approach those tough conversations about salary? I started here. So I went to software engineer. I went to Google. Now there's a couple levels available. The screenshot that I chose here is for new grad. So L3 is, and it even tells you, L3 is a new grad software engineer role at Google. And at Google, we get paid in 3 different ways. We get paid a base salary that doesn't really change. We get paid a stock. So we get paid a number of stocks throughout the year. And the value of that changes based on how Google stock does. But the most important thing is that the stock number is negotiated when you sign your offer. And then you get a bonus based on your performance. Now, for folks who are, not customer facing versus customer facing, the bonus portion can vary greatly based on, your customers' consumption. But that's generally what it is, right? And then to dig even deeper, we have, crowdsourced information here based on folks who recently got an offer, based on folks who've been working at those companies. And you can see by location, because, as we know, salaries do vary by location. So between that, I actually took a look and I plotted these out, and I took, a range that I found was appropriate, and I took that to the salary negotiations. And then the spoiler was that when I actually got into Google, we have, we have like an internal tool where folks at Google kind of contribute their own salary as well. So this is, of course, a public tool. At Google, we have basically like a forum tool for it. And the data is published. I was very, very pleased to find out that I was being paid just right. So I wasn't being underpaid. It was just right. And it was in line with my peers. So very good tool. Like in terms of going into salary negotiation, it's really important to have data. And in terms of understanding your value. So this site helped me out a lot. I think the last thing that I will want to share was that you just need a little bit of luck, right? You could be doing everything right. But ultimately, if landing your dream job just needs a little bit of luck. We've been really unlucky the last couple of years. Sometimes that just happens. I've been seeing really qualified friends and people just not get the job recently because positions just don't exist anymore. So my philosophy is just be the most prepared you can be. If you have the time, never stop learning. Try to be a good person, every group, every project that you work on, just make genuine connections. You just never know who could help you, right? So and I'll share the personal anecdote is that the first time I applied to Google, right, I didn't even really get a call back. But a couple of years later, a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn, and she was like, "Hey, I found your resume in the pile," basically. And we have a number of positions. Like, do you want to have a conversation? And that's how I got this job. So that's why everything that I share with you, I think, is very, very important. Making sure that you build genuine connections along the way, making sure you can be found on LinkedIn for the right things, making sure you use these tools that are available to you. So yeah, that that is what I will leave you with. And with that, I'll open it up to Q&A and happy to answer anything.
Thank you for the presentation, Pat. I know you touched on a few topics that everybody would love to hear about. Some of the resources you shared, fantastic. I think the levels.fyi, I think that's going to be super helpful for a lot of people here. Probably me also. So now we had a bunch of questions coming through the chat. I took notes of all of them. I just want to put this out. If anybody sent a question in the chat and wants to raise their hand and ask the question themselves, please do that. Always nicer to do it that way, but I'm always happy to read that out. So if anybody wants to ask questions now, start raising your hands and we can go in order. Amazing. We have our first volunteer. So okay, I think Sari. So Sari, I'm going to unmute you, and then
yeah, and
go
I'll take the two questions here that have raised their hand, but I now see the chat, and I also want to get through some of those questions.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I've got them all covered.
Yeah, perfect.
I've got them all covered, and I'll get to them. No worries.
Perfect. So I'll do these two first, and then let me look at the chat and see the questions.
Sounds good. Okay, Sari, if you'd like to unmute and go ahead and ask the question.
Hi. First, thank you so much for this whole presentation. It was actually really helpful. There were so many details specifically that I didn't know. So I really appreciate that. And I had a few more questions about the resume. Would you say it's better to have a plain white looking resume or a colorful one is preferred? I see a lot of different views on that, so I thought to ask you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this is just my personal opinion. In general, the plain white and black resume is always safest, but there's definitely nothing wrong, and it's always really fun to have a bit of color, as long as it's still very easy to read. So for my resume, for example, I like to show a bit of personality, and I have purple on my resume. Like my name is purple, for example. I know some people, when they have applied to Google, they kind of make it Google colors, at least the headline, they'll like bold it and make it, a green, red, blue, yellow, the Google colors. So definitely nothing wrong with that. Like, have fun with it. But certainly make sure it's still readable. So I have seen folks that use maybe the font is a very light color on the white background is hard to see, or maybe the actual resume background is like all blue, and then they have a dark blue font. So I would say steer away from that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a few more questions, but I'll let other people go first and then ask them later.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll go with Celine next.
Hi, Pat. Thank you for having this office hour with all of us. And so my question is that in your presentation, you shared a lot of strategies that you had being a Canadian applying to the US job market. But I still want to ask, would you say that there is a major setback to applying for jobs in the US market as a Canadian? And would you mind sharing a few more strategies you took to overcome this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, we could have another hour discussion just all about that. It is a little difficult, I will say. The main reason being, and I mentioned this, is around the competition. So I think we all have to be open and honest, is that, when I started making friends in the US, especially West Coast California, Silicon Valley, these folks typically, when they come out of school, they have excellent internships at top companies that unfortunately just don't have a footprint in Canada. right? So already the experience was a little bit of a setback for me personally. Now that's not to say we can't overcome it. Certainly with education, with certificates, with projects, it is very much possible, but I would be lying to you if I said that, you know, it was easy.
Celine, any follow-ups?
Oh, and then other than the ones you mentioned that like about including your address and in your Canadian address in your like LinkedIn profile or your resume, and what are some other and like you also mentioned talking about taking our roles in the US market in the current position. What are some like, do you have any more helpful tips that you would give out?
Yeah. So I think one thing that helped me a little was try to, and the main thing that I found was a setback for me was truly the experience. Like the experience when I started looking, my experience just did not compare or stack up. So I was looking for projects and experience with more international companies, or at the very least companies with a well-known presence in the US. So that, you know, when I was applying or when I was interviewing, at least in their head, they could anchor it on, okay, I can understand the level of impact because I know what that company is. Something else that you can do very quickly, which is what I did, where I was not able to get that experience right away, but I had started interviewing, was immediately in the interview or even in my cover letter, I would just spend a little bit of time setting the context of like, this is what the company is, this is the number of users, this is potentially the revenue, so that at least they understand if they don't know that company, you have made somewhat of a big impact. If I'm able to get in front of someone and actually, you know, talk during the interview, I would say, so let's say we have experience with Rogers or Telus or Bell, right? I would try to translate that to an American company, right? Like AT&T, like T-Mobile, like Virgin. And I found that really helped. So just like some long-term and short-term things you could do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Celine. We'll go with Naman. Naman, if you have a question, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much, Patricia, for making time for all of us. So I have an interview with Google scheduled for day after tomorrow, and I'm just extremely
This is very soon.
Yeah, I'm just so nervous about that. So that's the phone screening interview, I believe. And I was wondering if you have any advice or any last minute tips for me.
Yeah, you can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk one-on-one about that. But generally for the phone screen, and this is the case for all similar companies, you'll start with, you know, sort of a recruiter phone call, and that's more of a fit phone call just to make sure. You may then have a secondary technical screen where they ask some basic like coding questions, and these are nothing too extensive. They're typically 15 to 20 minutes, just at that basic level. So happy to talk to you about it a little bit more. But yeah, I just want to make sure we get to everyone else's questions too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
no
also, do they also tend to ask some technical questions in the first screening interview?
So yeah, it definitely depends on the role that you're being hired for. If it's, you know, again, a technical role at a company like Google or Amazon or Microsoft or Meta, it typically, from my experience, it's been a mixture of both. So they'll hit you with a quick behavioral, and then they'll hit you with a quick coding question, and it won't be, you know, a case study. It'll be more like technical, more I would say more like textbook question.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Okay, next we have Muskan.
Hi. Thank you so much, first of all, for your presentation and all the advice that you had. So I just kind of wanted to hear from you. What would you advise? I'm a second year student and I'm starting to look for co-op in the summers. And I am open to doing a co-op in the US. Also, I understand that's very competitive, but it's not that I'm pretty much open to working in the US or Canada. Like I would be applying for companies on both ends. What would your advice be, to a second year student, because we anyway don't have any kind of skill sets yet, which are, not at a very competitive level. And it's, I mean, I would say that I don't think I have too many projects or skill sets to show. So how do you have any advice to for me to start working as to how I should approach these, and what would be an ideal time to start applying to companies, and just your overview on getting a co-op, because I've heard getting your first co-op is kind of competitive, and people say you should apply to at least 200-300 companies. I don't know.
Oh gosh, yeah. Lots of really good questions there. I'll try to tackle them one by one. Your first question was around just getting experiences. How can you make sure that you can be competitive if you don't have any work experience?
Okay.
And that's always the hardest thing. The hardest thing. This is the hardest thing for me. That was the first application that I sent for like internships when I was still in school. That was probably the hardest application process for me, because I had no experience. Like the stories that you could tell, maybe you could talk about your group projects in school. But if I look at that compared to my most recent interview with Google, it was so much easier to interview now when I have experience, because I can easily just say, oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, let me tell you about that. Specifically. So here's what I did when I was in second and third year. And before I started, I do want to say, as a second year, if you are applying to internships, that you're already ahead. Like that's great. And you do have time, right? So don't stress too much. I know, like, I don't think I got a second year internship. I don't even think I didn't get an internship until my third or fourth year. So don't worry too much if you don't get an internship. There's tons of things you can do. And don't worry, right? Because we are in hard times right now. So what I did personally was that I talking again about those free online courses, Coursera, going through those in terms of different topics. Usually they will have you work through a lab or do a self-starter project. And from my experience, there were many different examples in the courses where you can follow exactly the template, or and this is in any area, not just software engineering, marketing, analytics, right? Usually there's a templated project that at the very least you can kind of stand up yourself. And then if you go through, a several weeks course that is for free, typically they have you build something. So I would start there. I put those projects on my resume. And that was what I talked about in my internship interviews. Something else, that I would just say is that when I started working, I was working for startups, right? I was just working part-time for startups while I was in school. This was, my first kind of jobs after being a server. Nothing wrong with that, right? You don't have to go for the big companies right off the top. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, because the point is to gain experience. And then you put that on your resume, you build it up and up. And then I would say, sorry, I think you had a question, the very last question, I totally forgot what it was.
I think I asked you about, okay, even I asked a lot of questions. I don't remember what was the last thing I asked you though.
Was it about Canadian working in Canada versus the US? I think it was like, should you apply for both or something like that?
Yeah. You're as a student, as a second year student applying for internships or co-ops in the US, is that how would you advise to kind of go with, is that different from applying for jobs, or does that follow a similar?
Yeah, the process is not too different. For example, my younger sister, her first internship was in the US. So certain, I mean, it varies from company to company, but certainly I would not stray away from applying to US internships. It's not as complicated from my experience doing a US internship versus, the legal paperwork of actually moving to the US for a job. So if something, piques your interest, don't be shy to apply for both US and Canada.
Got that. Also, do you mind talking about the legal aid for UBC students that you mentioned?
I actually have
Yeah,
a link to share on that. So I
perfect.
saw your question in the chat. So Muska, I'm going to send the link in the chat
Okay.
to perfectly answer that question, and then we'll go to the next person here. But thank you for all
Yeah.
your questions.
Thank you.
I only see Singh as a name, so I'm just going to tag you if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Sahil Singh, and really a great presentation by Patricia. I learned a lot from the presentation, the minor details and everything. I just want to ask you, like, your background was in commerce, finance, and business management. So, like, just doing the Coursera courses for software engineer, like that helped you to transition from business to like the software consulting, the software engineering roles. Like, can you explain more about that facet of your, career?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't want to bore you guys with it, but I'll try to run through it really quickly. So I didn't start from zero. The BTM specialty really helped. We learned a lot about database design, e-commerce design. It wasn't Bucks. If I were to do it again, I'd probably do Bucks, of course. I didn't have that hindsight. But I at least had that basic training, structured training from school. We had, networking courses. So at least the basic, architecture was there. In terms of upskilling by myself, the next step after that is exactly what I did. I took courses on, Python, Java, HTML, CSS. But then, because I was very fortunate to work in consulting where you can kind of shift projects quite frequently. So how it works for those who are not familiar is that in a consulting company, typically you're assigned a project, and then that project could run for 3 to 6 months. It's a specific project for a specific company, and it's a very specific goal. Optimize this, improve that, launch this product, assess the market strategy. After that project, you then have the opportunity to move on to a new project. So I was able to take advantage of that and then talk to my manager and also look for roles that were a little bit more technical. So that's how I started creeping more and more into the software space. At first, I was a solutions architect where I just gathered business requirements. I wrote documents. I started working with a lot of developers, testers, engineers. My next role, it just kind of progressed more and more. So my next role, I wanted to be, a team lead for technical design. Then my next role, I was actually, leading as a product manager and leading like release trains and feature releases. And then, bounce around to a number of roles where I was like a test lead, where I was a release manager. So I was very fortunate to be able to pivot so quickly just due to the nature of consulting. But I would say that is still advice, I would impart to you guys, whether it's if you're in a very specific role, see if you can branch out a little bit, because if you reach out to other people in your company and you're like, hey, can I help with this? People usually don't say no, right? Or you can use that as a sort of thought for career jumping. That could work as well. So maybe your first role is as someone who's peripherally technical, and then you interview for another role at another company that's a little bit more technical. So that's the way I did it. It took a number of years, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for the question. Sari, I'm going to read some of the questions that were sent in the chat, and then we'll come back to you if there's some time, if that's okay. So Patricia, there's a couple of questions about recommendations for first-year students. Maybe do you have any suggestions for what a first-year student can do to set themselves up for success?
Yeah, definitely. One thing, if I were to go back, and this is something that's of course easy to say, hard to do. If I could understand what options were available to me and what careers or roles I wanted to do right out of school, that might have saved me some time. So personally, I chose business because I knew that was the major where you had to declare your specialization last. I knew that we didn't have to choose until third year, right? Whereas if I were to go into biology or engineering, like I had to choose right away. And then in third year, I still had no idea what I wanted to declare. So I declared finance because I'm like, okay, everyone says finance is useful. So I started with finance. And then I think the following year, I kind of realized like, hey, I really like messing around with computers, just looking at websites, like doing coding on the side. So I added BTM, right? Now, if I could do it all again, I might have gone, as I said before, I might have just tried to go straight into Bucks. that's not bad, right? I'm not saying I wasted time. But I'm saying that, if I had known what I wanted to do earlier, it would have really helped me, right? I'm not regretting it. Obviously, everything I learned in finance was fantastic. Everything I learned in consulting coming out of school really helps me day to day in terms of relationships, project management. But at the very least, if I had advice, this is a very cool career opportunity and you might want to consider it. That would have been very helpful. So I'll just round that off by saying, where can you find that information, right? Workplace apps, Blind or Fishbowl are areas that really helped me. It's people talking casually about what kinds of roles are available, attending things like these, right? Looking on LinkedIn, as I mentioned, just how to filter jobs, see what you'd like to do. So that's where I'd start.
Okay, great. On that note, I'm curious if you are okay to share your presentation we can share that with me if you want to, if there's anything you want to remove, and then we can send it to everyone who attended today. So if they want some of the resources or screenshots, may have been a bit too small. So that might be really helpful if that's
Yeah,
okay.
of course. Yeah, happy to do
Perfect. Okay, I know we're coming up to time. We have a couple more questions that were in the chat. If that's okay with you, Pat, I'll ask them quickly. We can do
that. Of course,
rapid
no,
fire.
I've got time. Let's try to get through them. Yeah.
Perfect. There were a couple of questions specifically about your current role now. So just curious to learn more about the CE role, what the day-to-day looks like, and do you enjoy working for Google as a customer engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Thank you for the question. I'm happy to talk about that. So a customer engineer is an interesting role. I think only Google calls it customer engineer. Over at Amazon, they might call it solution architect. I think that's what Microsoft also calls it. But this was a role that I was very, very excited to find out existed because I was able to be customer facing. So what I love to do is talk to people all day, right? When I was looking for roles, and that's what I did in consulting, I did more of the talking to people and less of the coding. I thought I wanted to transition and, not talk to people and just stare at a screen all day. Luckily, I found out that was not what I wanted to do, and there is a middle ground. So I'll walk you through, what a typical day in the life looks like, and I hope it doesn't bore you guys too much. But I am assigned specifically to customers in Los Angeles and in like greater LA, SoCal. And each customer engineer has, a patch of accounts that they kind of get to take care of, and folks that I get to talk to every day. My specialty is fintech companies, so financial companies or digital native fintech companies in LA because of my experience in finance and payments. And they use, a number of Google Cloud products just to run infrastructure, to settle payments, to manage customer information, to ensure that signing in, accessing credit cards or debit cards is private and secure. So that's basically what I do all day is I talk to them in terms of, hey, how can you improve your, how can you optimize your database, your architecture? We have a new product, we have a new feature. Do you want to try it out? And then, of course, sometimes it's a lot of debugging. They have an issue, they light a fire and we figure it out, or supporting them on their major programs, projects. So I love doing that. Hopefully that helped a little bit. It's not exactly a role I would say that Google hires out of school. Certainly it is more of a mid-career role, but folks on my team that have kind of transitioned over, the background has been consulting, has been software engineering, has been even sales, like technical sales folks, and then account managers and such. So that would be the path to this sort of role.
Okay, great. There were a couple other questions. I'll try to combine them together here, and then we'll go the last to Sari's question that you have your hand raised. Do you mind sharing your mindset throughout the 2-year journey of building up your technical skills and applying to your dream company? What did you do when you faced obstacles?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The obstacle was, and there were a number, right? The first couple obstacles were even just trying to get noticed, throwing your resume out there, trying to get either a callback or an interview. after, and then the next obstacle from there would be interview prep, right? Understanding what kinds of questions would be asked, ensuring that I was brushing up on my technical acumen and I was really nailing case studies, questions. Behavioral questions is one that a lot of people overlook, but is very, very, very important. So, let me just take a step back in terms of the first obstacle was getting noticed. I think a lot of topics in my presentation covered that. And that's exactly what I would stick by. In terms of the interviewing portion, lots of resources out there for the technical portion. I'm going to emphasize the behavioral, right? Because ultimately what it comes down to when you have a number of very technically talented candidates is the behavioral portion, at least from my experience. So behavioral in the sense that, making sure that your attitude is open, honest, you're a person of integrity, trying to put your best self forward and communicating that you're easy and fun to work with, you're flexible. So I will focus on that for sure. I will make sure that I kind of practice that I'm comfortable with my behavioral questions so that I'm not like stiff as a board and really awkward. Try to make it more conversational. And then the last obstacle that I personally faced was that I actually, before Google, I got a number of offers. And the part that for me personally, kind of stopped that was the immigration process, right? So that's not something that I can talk about with you guys today, just because everyone's process is different. But if I were to just give a general piece of advice to folks who for immigration might be a challenge, is to really make sure you understand your situation before you apply, right? And make sure that not only before you're looking for companies, like you kind of take care of your personal legal situation, but also in the process. So there were companies where and this changes a lot. There were companies where they had said, hey, we can sponsor you. And then it turns out that they couldn't, it sucked. I cried, but that's okay. You bounce back. Because as I said, you can get unlucky, but all you need to do is get lucky once.
Yeah. Okay, no, those are great points. This question's come in twice. Would you recommend using the Sauder resume template for internships? I don't know if you know their Sauder resume template to answer this question. I
have not seen the latest version, but from what I had seen a couple years ago, it was pretty good. So if it hasn't changed too much, then yeah, go for it.
I will also say we have our career coaches team at the CSINC, so please come in. They can support you with all kinds of resumes, so just book an appointment and come in for that. So I'll plug that there. Okay, nice. Saturday, we'll go with your question now, please.
Thank you. I just was wondering, kind of on the same line as the other guy asked about interviews and everything, would it be okay if I reach out to you as well on LinkedIn to ask some more questions about the interview process and everything?
Yeah, I would say in general, if you or other folks are interested in applying for Google and you have specific roles in mind, feel free to reach out. I can't promise I can get to everyone, but I will try my best.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think that's it for questions, and I think I covered everything that came in the chat. So Patricia, on that note, I just wanted to thank you again for hosting this office hour. You saw how many questions are coming in. You covered a really interesting topic. So thank you for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us. We're going to throw a little survey QR code on the screen in a second. If you take 2 to 3 minutes to just take a picture, scan, and answer the survey, that would be fantastic. It just helps us get a better picture of if you enjoyed the event and what you look for in the future. So again, you can just scan the QR code there. We'll send the recording of this event as well as Patricia's presentation to anybody who was in the event in the following day. So keep an eye out on that in your emails. We'll continue to host office hours into the new year, as well as career fairs, info sessions. So check Careers Online, check your UBC events calendar. And that's it from my end. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and we hopefully see you soon in other events.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Pat.